This Restorative Justice Life is a production of Amplify RJ. Follow us on all social media platforms at Amplify RJ, or sign up for our email list to stay up to date on everything we have going on. And to get the most involved, join our free Mighty Networks community to get connected with others living this restorative justice life all over the world. As far as this podcast goes, make sure you're subscribed, leave a rating and review, and share with a friend to help us further amplify this work. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to This Restorative Justice Life, the podcast that explores how the philosophy, practices, and values of restorative justice apply to our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for the ancestors, and I'm the founder of Amplify RJ. On this podcast, I talk with RJ practitioners, circle keepers, and others doing this work about how this way of being has impacted their lives. Richard, welcome to This Restorative Justice Life. Who are you?
I am a son of Georgia Cruz from the Assiniboine tribe in Canada and Montana. I'm her son, and like from her lineage and from that native background of inclusiveness, of like love, and just really, the son of my mother. That's exactly who I am.
Who are you?
I'm also a product of this United States or America or whatever it's been labeled, and growing up in poverty and a lot of trauma. Like, I'm also a survivor in those things. So yeah, I'm also a survivor of all these things that have been done to all these people in this country that have been brought here and that were here.
Who are you?
I'm also a brother to 2 and an uncle. I got a half sister and a half brother. Like, I'm a brother to them, and wanting a deeper relationship with them, wanting to always know how they're doing and to hope they're doing well. And then my nieces and nephews, uncle to them, somebody that hopefully they can look to for advice, or they could look to get some guidance, or an uncle that is not judgy and is like, you know, your uncle's been through a lot of stuff, and so you could talk to him just about anything.
Who are you?
I am a partner to Sonia, and a parental figure to her children, and to Coco, my dog. So yeah, and it's a loving partnership. I'm a loving partner to her, like really open to let her be who she is, and struggling with children at the same time, like not trying to put my stuff on them, like all the things that I've been through. And, you know, as we raise them together with her and her ex-husband and their other stepmother, like really just figuring it all out and like trying to be the best. I like to say, I don't like to say I'm their dad. I'm another parental figure or an uncle. As we say, everybody's in relations. I'm more of an uncle to them than I am that, and feel that love for them. So I'm also that, a partner and an uncle and a parental figure.
Who are you?
A leader in our organization. And when I say a leader, I mean not so much in the hierarchy sense, but in a sense that people look up to me for advice and for guidance in the things that they're doing within our org. And so it can be a day-to-day thing of, you know, just like, how do I code my receipts, to like, how do I facilitate, or how do I, you know, can I talk to you about some things that are like going on in my life? And so being that person or for others, you know, it's another way. It's a leadership role that I allowed to go all over the place. And it's not just stuck in one, say, employee, employer type thing. And so I'm also that.
Who are you?
I am also somebody that is coming out of mass incarceration and learning what this outside world is like experiencing new things and learning a lot of new things out here. It's going in at 16, coming out at 46. The world really changed, and just experiencing different ways of being in the world, the way different people are, the way different cultures are. So I'm really a a learner and have that learner's mind of going around the world and going around the country and just and learning about things. And so I really feel like very young in that essence of learning and having experiences in this world. So
And finally, for now, who are you?
I am a person who values relationships and straightforwardness and honesty, and then also connection, also to my own space and like my own things. I'm like not an introvert, not an extrovert, somewhere in between. I like to be with people, then I like to be by myself sometimes. I am definitely an animal lover. Like I love animals. I love dogs, and so that is at the core of me. And yeah, it's me.
Thank you so much, Richard, for sharing all that you've shared already. We're going to get to the intersections of so many of those things in our conversation right after this. I'm so excited for this conversation with Richard Cruz, and we'll get there real quick. Just wanted to throw out some quick reminders that our efforts to amplify restorative justice work span many digital platforms. So in addition to this podcast feed, you can now share content about folks living this restorative justice life across TikTok, YouTube, and of course, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and all the things. You sharing the content of this podcast literally helps us amplify this work to other folks. And as we're building this restorative justice movement, we need all the help we can get. If you want to learn alongside of our community, we of course have our asynchronous learning opportunities, community events, and collaborative workshops, all linked in the show notes. Richard and I went really deep in this conversation, so I can't wait to share this conversation with you. So no more delays, here we go. Oh my goodness, Richard, it is so good to be with you. We connected initially at the NACRJ conference, followed up a little bit after. I was one of those people asking for advice around some of those things, organizationally, structurally, but you know, your story, your wisdom, we had to have you here. But before we get to all of that, it's always good to check in. So to the fullest extent that you want to answer the question, how are you?
Doing good this morning. I actually slept well last night. I'm like really older now, and so sleep means a lot to me. So it's just like, oh, if I get a good night's sleep, I'm good. Like I'm happy. If I look over and I see that clock 6:37, I'm like, yes, I slept in. And so really just feel good about that. I'm looking forward to it's Friday, so getting done today and then actually going to a drive-in on Saturday for one of the kids. She has to do a report, like she's with the newspaper, and she has to do a report on drive-ins, and I love drive-ins. Like, so I'm just like, yeah, let's go. And so looking forward to that, getting ready to go to New York on Monday and spend the week there. And so yeah, it's a weekend, but it's like, okay, I got to get a lot of things done before I leave. And so, yeah, I'm feeling good, feeling energized. I got myself organized this morning, and I'm happy today.
Absolutely. I feel you on the sleep thing for sure, for, you know, slightly different reasons. I don't see a future where anywhere near future where I get like straight nights of sleep, just because having a 5-month-old, having a baby. But you know, when there is like at least like 2-3 hour stretches, good night, I feel great. I already told you that I'm like extra caffeinated this morning, but you know, sleep being so important, glad that was something that you were able to do, especially as you're so jet setting, always on the go. I imagine like that piece is often a challenge, sleeping in different environments. But you're here for this conversation, talking about this restorative justice life, and that's something that you have lived in many ways for a number of different years, probably before you even knew the word restorative justice. So, in your own words, how did this journey get started for you?
So, yeah, it's all based on like with the meaning of what I describe as the meaning of restorative justice. And so restorative justice to me means like, and I intersect it with circle and with relationship. I've been doing this like probably my whole life and with my mother. And so it started back then. I've been doing this ever since we used to sit around. We didn't sit around the table and have dinner, but we would sit around the TV and eat together and talk about things that were going on, issues we were having, resolving problems with, me and my sister, or me and my mother, or me and my stepdad. We were figuring out things and how to work and how to live together in a very relational way. And even with my brother and others in our neighborhood, like that to me is when that's the value of it and the principle of it and the practice of it is like we were doing it back then and it was ingrained in us. And, generations before that, doing it in our tribes, or, it's innate. For me, it's an innate thing that's been handed down. And so going through that, and then, like I mentioned before, I went to prison at 16, went in there and was part of groups, some groups that were considered healthy, some that were considered not. The same principles were there. Like we were taking care of each other. Like we were, whether that group was, say, a gang or a drug and counseling group, going through prison, we were doing the same thing. We were dealing with issues, problems that were coming up amongst us as a collective and as a group. Like things would come up all the time, and we would go to our elders or the people who knew better or had wisdom, and like, we're having this problem, and we wouldn't want to fight about it. Like fighting and violence was our last option, but we would try to figure it out. How do we resolve this first? Right. And so we would talk about it, see if we could resolve it and figure out a way. And so we actually did it inside a lot of the times. And then it started getting into, after getting away from the negative groups of like, oh, let's figure out this problem. If we can't, then we resort to violence. Getting out of that and getting more into when I started doing groups for multiple things like drugs, AA, NA, some inner wounded child, some drug and alcohol counseling. It all came into play there. We would sit in circle, or we'd sit around a table, or we'd sit in chairs, and we would start talking about what the problem was. And then we would start getting into the root of it. Like, how did this come about? How did it, and supporting people in a way that, supporting each other, I should say, not me doing it to them, but supporting each other in a way that was more loving. And I remember doing this when I was in the youth authority, before I went to prison, because I went from juvenile hall to youth authority to prison as I got older. But I remember sitting down with this one lady, and we went outside, and she's like, "Come here, let me talk to you." And we were talking, and it was just me and her, but she was listening to me. She was hearing me. She was interested in like my life and where I came from. And I was like, I didn't know what it was back then, but now looking back, I'm like, oh, this was restorative. This was a restorative justice, or a circle, or however, it had the same values of this caring, this loving, this listening, and being seen and heard. And so I was like, oh shit, like that's what I wanted. That's what I needed. And so going back to there, and then as my journey went on, like participating in that both ways, inside of people coming to me with issues that they were having and wanting to talk about it, and just listening to them and not judging them, and seeing how they wanted to, figure it out for themselves. If they wanted to go deeper, or they just wanted to, just vent, like, and creating that safe space for them to do that. So it went on throughout my whole time inside for the 30 years. And then it got to the point of us actually, when it became named of, oh, this is restorative justice. When somebody introduced the concept to me inside, I was like, yeah, RJ. And I was like, what the hell is RJ? And they explained it to me. It's like, oh, we've been doing that forever. We built our own community in here. And like, we have a community accountability. Like, that's what we do. Like, and in my mind, I was thinking, you all don't do this out there. Like, this is normal for us. Like, our little communities in here are accountable to each other and to the whole. It's like you may have different group segments, but you're accountable to that group, and then all these groups are accountable to the whole. And we try to make sure that nobody like disrupts the whole community. And so yeah, I was like, oh yeah, this has been going on for years. Y'all like, it's an interesting thing that you named it.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, from the beginning of this podcast, right, people have talked about this not being this way of being, right, this quote unquote restorative justice life, is not because of like the work of Howard Zur and those people, right, who gave name and like terminology and language around like a specific practice of repairing harm to the extent possible involving those who have like a stake in a specific offense, right? That is like what many people now know as restorative justice. But I'm thinking back to like the 4th episode of this podcast, Helen Thomas, who is Lakota, and talking about her mom just saying like, no, we just live this circle way, and like that's how she grew up. And then when she got to college and learned like, oh, restorative justice, what's that? Like exactly what you're saying, like, yeah, this is just what we do. And, you know, some of us are more separated from those traditions than others. But whether or not you are indigenous to Turtle Island, you know, this continent, many people are able to identify spaces in their families where relationships existed, accountability was there, and people were really interested in like building relationships, continuing to remain in a relationship, even when conflict and harm happen. Because, I mean, those people in your family aren't going anywhere. Those people inside of a prison, like, you know, sometimes people transition in and out, but like they're not going anywhere. You're in more ways than sometimes people on the outside. You're stuck with those people, right? And so there's a violent way to deal with conflict and harm, but this is the way that just makes the most sense for everybody's well-being, and actually getting to the root of problems and moving forward. I have a problem when I ask that question, because like you kind of took us like through all of the journey, and I want to go back to childhood. One, can you like geographically place where you were growing up?
So I was born in Mountain View in the Bay Area in California, and then I was raised in the Bay Area in Sacramento, Northern California.
Yeah.
Throughout my childhood, up until we moved around a lot. I never went to one school for longer than a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually dropped out of school in the 9th grade.
Yeah.
And then went to prison. Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah.
But California Department of Corrections, in all the iterations, that was. And so thinking about like a landscape where you grew up, you talked about trauma, and I'm not sure how like you were specifically using that. Sometimes people think about that as like the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and I imagine like that score was like pretty high for you. And when you think about, you know, being a survivor of all of that, contributing to like the decisions the choices that you were making that like ended you up in the DOC, I think about all of the ways that when we're talking about restorative justice, it's not just about like this one thing that this one person did in this one instance. It's there was harm on this land. Right, this land was stolen. Right, people were enslaved here to build the structures and the entity so that let this country continue to exist and create these conditions where people have limited choices, or perceived limited choices, often choices that will end up causing harm to themselves, to others, also ending up in within the criminal legal system. Yes. It's not just so restorative justice is not just like how do we repair those incidents of harm and how do we take accountability. I think so much about like how do we change the systems, and some might argue that that's like a transformative justice framework, and I say you're right, and like let's not get caught up in like the words and the terminology. I'm curious, as you have experienced this breadth of restorative work, right? Both from your home, both inside, in more violent settings where like it's just like prevention, to spaces where you're like proactively working on yourself and like the work that you've been doing outside. How do you, maybe the answer is simply like restorative justice isn't all of it, but how do you like differentiate like what was restorative in one space versus like when I got formal language for it, like it's something different? Does that question make sense?
The formal language, yeah, I think, yeah, it makes sense. What was the first point of your question? Because I was focusing on the second part.
Yeah. So you had this experience of things that are restorative before you knew the word restorative justice. And now, since the terms have been introduced, you've been doing a lot of work with them. Do you see a difference in the work or in the way that you engage?
Okay. So yeah, I think the before I knew the term, like there was, like we had issues, we had problems, we had things that came up, and they were all because of trauma. They were all, there's a root somewhere. And so understanding that piece takes some internal work. Mm-hmm. And then what always gets me is like, before I knew the definition or what has been defined as restorative justice, like who got to define the harm was us. It wasn't some law that some white man wrote that determines what harm is. Like in the hood, we determine what harm is. And in prison, we determined how we hurt each other. It wasn't what the prison system said. It wasn't what the law was. It was like, what does harm to us? Like, how do you go against the collective? And so we determined what the harm was. And then we figured out, like, how do you get back correct with that? It didn't have nothing to do with the system. So it was like, for instance, if I felt disrespected, like how does somebody repair that in this setting? Like there's no law against it. There's no, oh, you got disrespected, but it is something that happens within our community. Mm-hmm. So what did I need? I needed this person to understand what he did, how he disrespected me, how I'm feeling about it, and then not to do it again. But like, how do we work that out? And so we had to sit down and talk about it with other people that were there that we trusted and like figure that out. And so I think before all this term came, like we defined what was harm. We defined what was straight criminalized or these things. And then we got to decide how to fix that or how to repair that in many different ways. And so I think now that it's been defined as like, we look towards this criminalization version, but not understanding how people became criminalized and how this system has criminalized people. And so you have somebody out there that may be selling drugs, but why are they selling drugs? Because they don't have opportunity for employment. They don't have, their choices are very limited. Like, I think these things, and now you consider this person a criminal. I would consider this person just trying to eat and survive. And so like, there was this great thing that came out to where this kid he was a child and he went to go and he stole from the store. He stole some food and they called the cops on him. The cops arrested him. He was like 12 years old or something. They brought him into court and the judge was like, what happened here? And he said, did you steal this? He's like, yeah. He's like, how come? So we don't have no food at home. So I was just stealing to get food and bring it home. And this judge, I love this judge. This judge said, oh, okay. He said, I'm finding the whole courtroom except for this child. The people who called the police on him, the DA, the prosecutor, the public defender, everybody in here. Because like you didn't look at the situation, like you didn't look at the context, you just automatically criminalized this child. And not the fact that he was, and how we failed him as a community instead of putting the blame on this child, like, why didn't you look at yourself and see what the hell was going on here? And so just loving that concept and like, oh, we get to look at what's going on instead of just this one moment in time. Like you were saying, I'm going to freeze this person in this one moment in time, and we're going to judge you based on this, which may criminalize you for the rest of your life. And you have to die on the sword every time you see something or see somebody and I did this. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Now I'm a great person. Like, no, but you don't understand the whole context around what happened. and understanding that is, I think, what we were doing way before RJ became mainstream. It's like understanding each other. Oh, we understand the context in the hood. We understand the context in, urban environments and the reservation and like all these different environments. We understand what's going on here and not looking to the outside of a law that was written to criminalize others and to criminalize us. And so I think that is where I really, really believe that we were doing it before this came about.
Well, you said a couple things that like made me question. One, like in both of our day-to-day, restorative justice is a word that gets said, maybe 100 times. I still don't know that the ideas are mainstream, right? And like the ideas that people have of them are often around like alternatives to like punishment and the criminal legal system. I'm curious, and I've been questioning this for a while, even though like my organization is called Amplify RJ. Is it helpful to use that term? Because like when we're describing something that is so much deeper, like is it helpful to use that term? Like what is another term that you've taken to using? Like, we're talking about interconnection, we talk about right relationship, but like that's not a concept that people are like really familiar with or like can grasp as like, oh, this is the thing that we're working towards.
Yeah, I mean, RJ like really is a Western word, and I mean it's we've had this conversation many times about just slapping justice on the back of things, like restorative justice, transformative healing justice,
social justice, right?
Like,
yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell is it with this word? As soon as justice comes up, and I even had my Sonia's daughter even asked me, like, what do you think about what is justice? I said, oh my God. So it brings up all kinds of things for me. And it's for me, it's a word of like, it's a Western word that means we're gonna determine what equalizes or what balances out the harm that we determine that happened to you through the system. And so it's like, it doesn't really matter what I think, it's what the system thinks balances it out. And so whenever that word justice comes in, I think of systems, and I think, oh, they want to take over and figure out how to balance out the harm that happened to something or somebody, and they're going to figure it out. And I'm like, oh no, it's like it's creating another system to basically get equalization or to balance out a harm. And another term that I've been using instead of restorative justice or any justice term is healing. It's like when people ask, what kind of work do you do? We do healing work. And they're like, what is that? And I'm glad that they're asking a question, because I'm saying, well, it depends on you. It depends on what you want. Like, how do you heal? What does your culture do? What is it deep down inside that you need in order to feel whole again, or to feel like you've been, if you've been wronged, how do you feel like that's been balanced out for you? Not for me, because my culture may be totally different in the way that I feel balanced out. And how does it feel for you? Do you just want an explanation? Do you actually want somebody punished? Do you want money? What is it that you want? Like, because it's up to you. It's not up to me to determine, oh, well, 10 years makes you feel balanced and $50,000 restitution to this person makes it balanced. Or if they give you this amount of money in reparations, then you should be cool. Like that is all like, but how does that feel? How does that sit with you? Did that really repair the harm that was done? And I think that goes many different levels. And so whenever I'm asked about, what is RJ? I'm like, well, RJ is Western, but like what kind of work we do. And the term I would use is healing work. And, one of the, well, yeah, let me not go into, because you may ask later.
No. Oh, well, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so like when we have this land in Santa Cruz that we were gifted by a donor that like really believes in the work we do, and it's open and it's free for people to come and do healing work. And every time they come, we're like, what do you want? What do you need? What is it that you want to do on this land? Not what we want you to do. And so it's always putting it back on the person, because I think, and my belief is like, you have the answers within you. And if we could work through it and figure it out, then, it's like just asking those curious questions.
Well, I mean, and I think to that point, it is so much more participatory than like a formalized criminal legal process, or even like a formalized, hey, you're gonna come and have this restorative conversation, come sit in this circle and like tell us exactly what you want. Like that might work for like all of those processes work for some people in some capacity. You and I favor one of those over the other, but like just I'm always struck by people who like also like don't just define restorative justice as like alternatives to the criminal legal system, but like define restorative justice as circle. Like circle's a practice, right? Circle is a way of being also, right? But you can do quote unquote restorative justice work, quote unquote healing work without ever sitting in a circle, right? I've been leaning on the book Talking Stick by Stephen Beyer a lot recently. And he talks about, you know, I think the framework that he uses in the book is counsel, right? But when you're passing a talking stick in counsel, right, that's a beautiful way to listen and engage and be with people. But you can also, he terms it like your invisible talking stick, right? And then like carry that with you as you go about your everyday, whether that is with other people, whether that is with nature, whether that is just with your environment, right? That work is who we are. And I'm curious, you know, since you had that understanding or some inklings of that understanding as a young person, and as you navigated the criminal legal system in all of its iterations, all the situations that you went to, when you heard the word restorative justice and started doing work, well, when you heard the word restorative justice, how did you decide that like, oh, this is work that I want to continue to do?
It has like how it was taught to me, the word restorative justice is it has the same values and principles behind what we've been doing. It's just something that was out there that people understood.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, oh yeah, okay, so this is the work, and this is the in a dictionary defined way, this is what out-facing world understands this to be. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I don't mind, like I understand and I totally know the world I live in. The world that I want and the world I live in are two different things. And so like this world that we live in is hierarchical, very definition based, you know, very educational based, and however those came about, that's where we're sitting right now. And this is what the world understands. And so to move in that direction, it's like, yeah, we do RJ work, but once you get in it, you understand that it's much deeper. And like you were saying, the definition of RJ and circles are very different for me. Like circle is a practice and a ceremony. And it starts, for me, it starts in the sweat lodge of we're in circle and we're in a sacred space. And, you know, these things go, this medicine comes in and we talk and we go around and all these things. And so, and it's when we come out here, yes, some of quote RJ work can be done in circle in the same fashion with the same principles and the same values. And then others could be done one-on-one. Others can be done in case conferencing. Others could be done through surrogates. Like you don't even have to have the person who harmed you there. And so that's where RJ takes on a whole nother level as to where circle is a practice and a ceremony to me is like RJ is more of it's more Western, and there's more different ways to define it. Like you're repairing a harm based on somebody else, based on them, and you're just being able to facilitate that process. And like you said, walk around with that invisible stick and like, this is how I facilitate this process because I could listen to you, because I could listen to multiple people and not judge you based on your views, but understand that I have some judgment about it, but I could still sit in it with you. And so I think that's the value of sitting in circle, of sitting in ceremony, and of actually like listening for a long time and understanding yourself that you could do that.
How easy or hard was it to do this work, be this way, inside versus outside?
That's a good question. Inside, it was much easier.
Mm-hmm. And that might be surprising to some people, and it's not wholly for me, but go ahead.
Inside, it's much easier because people are, well, my experience was that the people that we were with wanted to do work on themselves and wanted to do work with others, like wanted to figure out, there was this deep sense in our community, and they're like, why the hell did I harm somebody like this? What was it in my life it made this choice okay for me? And so wanting to go back deep and wanting to work on ourselves allowed us to like not judge others and to sit in those circles. And plus we were a captive audience. So like we were on the yard, or we're in groups, like we weren't going anywhere. So anytime there was an issue, like we would go on the yard, we'd see each other every day. And the accountability piece was really easy because we all knew what each other was doing every day. You couldn't hide it from each other. Like you can't bullshit nobody. And so it's like, we know, like, and so it was easier inside, and the sense of community felt tighter inside. Like my sense of community, like I miss a lot of my relatives inside. Like I'm just like, damn. When I go back in, I'm like, oh, I'm home. Like I'm very comfortable going back inside and sitting with the fellas, and it's just, but out here, it is really hard to get that community feeling back. Like we really have to work at it hard, and we have to create it. The way that it's set up is everybody is, I feel that everybody is scared, and everybody goes into their boxes, homes, their own little cells, and like, I'm going to protect mine. And Justice Yazzie really defines this great for me. It's like, we could walk to the world in protectiveness or love. And like out here, I feel a lot of protected. Like, this is my home. Don't come over here. Like, and there's a lot of separation between people because that's just the way this culture is like everybody's trying to get me in mine. And like, there's no sharing of like everything. I went to India and felt a very different way of being. Everybody was outside, and everybody's seeing everybody's business. It's all outside. Everybody's doing things outside. And when I walk back to the United States, everybody's in their house. Like they come out for a few minutes to do their thing and they go back to their house. And it was the total opposite. So I think there's that. And then there's all what has been circumstantial, is everybody is like, this system is set up for everybody to fight against each other to get some money to survive. And so everybody's in the rat race and trying to figure out how they could take care of themselves. And it's been set up that way. And, to get outside of that thinking is hard out here. And no matter what you do, or no matter what I see people do, is like, oh, we're going to do this, but how do we make money? Or how do I support myself in doing it? Because you have to out here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, like, and even like, oh, well, even those that don't have, I could find a way to support them and support myself at the same time. And so this capitalist world is set up like that, and we have to figure it out because that's the world we live in, and there's no getting around it, and it's been set up. So it's hard to create community out here. We really don't know what each other's doing until somebody says something. And like everything's hidden inside the home, or it's at work, and it's very separated, like work and home life. What I do for work and what I do at home are two different things. They shouldn't mingle. Employees, employers, they shouldn't mingle. You shouldn't be friends also. Like, it's all set up to separate relationship. And I think the biggest difference is everything that we're trying to do is based on relationship. And so inside, everything was based on relationship. And within our org, we're trying to base everything on relationship. And not saying that it's all great and roses and butterflies, but it's hard to do out here.
Yeah. Before I ask so how does this work look, this relational way look in your organization? Just keep in mind, that's the question that I'm going to ask. I'm reflecting on, I've been on the recent episodes talking about, when people talk about like, oh, there's like no more neighborhood it's just the hood, right? They're often talking about times where people on the block knew each other, often talking about Black or brown communities, right? And the reason we had those conditions is because of housing segregation, right? those were the only places that we could live. Redlining, and now like for a number of factors, one, like people being able to move to different places, escape the hood, or being gentrified out, or like in some instances, police breaking up street organizations and separating people, and all the laws around subsidized housing and who can't live there. Like those neighborhoods have been broken up, those relationships, those families have been broken up. And while there's argument for like, oh, that's progress, people are able to like make choices, right? Like somebody's not incarcerated anymore. They can move about the world freely. They can make relationships with who they want. They don't necessarily have to be confined in a certain space. There is something that is great about having that container. And now with like this openness of the world and anybody being able to do anything, take care of what they want to take care of, it's difficult. You all have set up an organization that still operates within this global capitalist world, within like the nonprofit industrial complex. What does that look like? And for those who don't know, with the Ahimsa Collective.
So it's hard because our values are not capitalist, but I know that we have to abide by those rules in order to exist and do what we do. Like, and the same reason that everybody else does, because we need to put food on the table, we need to live, we need housing, we need to live within this capitalist world in order to get those things. And I mean, it's like, otherwise we wouldn't exist. Like we couldn't do anything. And so one of the things I wanted to say is, you brought up something is that the gentrification and the redlining that has happened in this country is still really felt, even by an organization like us. The generational traumas that are coming down, like we still feel it, even with our property in Santa Cruz. We feel it in the neighborhood there of like, yeah, okay, we have access and we have privilege now to go there, but it has been overtaken or developed by this American white culture to where when we go there, they're like, who are you and what are you doing here? Like, what are these people of color doing in our neighborhood? And it's like, oh shit. Like, if you were to ask that same question, like, what are you, where are you from, in South Central LA or in one of the hoods, like, those are fighting words, confrontational words.
Right.
And you're doing this. And so it's like,
those are confrontational words, right? Because like if the answer is not right, we're calling the police.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just like, oh shit, like it's racism, white supremacy is alive and well in this country. It's not gone. And there's still like redlining going on in a very quiet, like, oh, but if you do the wrong thing, we're going to try to get you out of this neighborhood because you're not, quote, good people. And so you can't trespass. You can't have access to this nature, unless you're good people and have money and privilege. And so like, it's very hard to go up against that. And our org, like we're going up against that face to face in our property there. And some of our reentry houses that we have, there's even some self-oppression, some internalized oppression that people have in the neighborhoods. And like, oh my God, like never heard nothing from people. And then all of a sudden they found out we have people that were formerly incarcerated living around them. Oh, well, why? And what about this, and this? But for the last year, there's been nothing. But as soon as you found out, now you see some problems because, and this is like when I say internalized oppression, it's because it's other people of color that are saying these things and that have adopted these ways, and they're like, now they're acting out in them. And so for our org, it's like confronting these things face head on. It's like, okay, we're ready to do this battle. And like even in Santa Cruz, when somebody asks me, hey, where are you from? What are you doing here? I'm like, I'm native and we've got some of our land back. And they're, oh shit. They're like, oh, what am I going to say to that?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because their argument is like, oh, we've been up here for 2 generations. Really? That's nice. And so, yeah, it's so fighting back that, and it's hard because trying to do it in a restorative way or in a healing way is like, I'm going to have to sit down with you and I'm going to have to absorb all of your trauma. But can you, and have you done that personal work to listen to ours, to listen to mine? And can you sit down with me? Are you still on this very naive plane of like, oh, this is the way it is in America. That's just it. Like even to just talk about the value of land ownership. Like, my people in our culture didn't believe we owned the land. We were with the land. But
Mm-hmm.
now you believe that you own all of this and it's yours. And so just those basic values, are you willing to sit down and like talk to somebody and accept the differences of like how I don't consider anybody a trespasser and you do? So like just all these things of like, so our organization is very much like we're fighting that head on, and it's hard. It's hard work, and it's exhausting because we feel like we're going back through the same battles again and again with everybody we meet. And we're like, oh, we got to talk about this again.
I think like, I mean, a number of things are coming up. One, I love, and I've had this conversation multiple times in the last couple of weeks, specifically around like the responses white people to have being introduced to this work, around like not feeling shamed, judged, or guilty for like the things that, not even like that their ancestors did, right? But like that they're continuing to uphold and perpetuate, right? Like your behaviors, like this work of healing, this work of restoring, like this is not easy, gentle, warm, fuzzy therapy, right? Like this is confronting the harm that you cause, and like you should feel awkward, uncomfortable, guilty. And like I don't want to just limit it to white people, right? Because you talked about like, you know, the internalized oppression that people have. We can also talk about the intersections of like gender, right? And so like when somebody like me is inadvertently or advertently acting out of like male privilege and misogyny, right, and patriarchy, right, like being called on that, like that's not fun, that's not comfortable. I'm not a perfect person, but like in order to be in right relationship, right, like I've got to confront that and heal. And so like twofold: one, to live restorative or healing values, right? Like it is never about like I've achieved this, I am now comfortable in being like this angel of a person who's never going to do any harm. It's a constant reminder of all of the ways that you're falling short and attempting to repair. But to also then step in and teach this and to like do this work, quote unquote, professionally, there's a lot of self-sacrifice and putting yourselves in situations to take on other people's pain. And, you know, we all have limits. And when I hear about you confronting folks who in their fragility, ignorance, anxiety, like putting that on you, like there's a limit to what anybody can take and like how you can absorb. How do you navigate that?
So I get mad. I get pissed.
Yeah.
Like I don't hide that. I just have people to talk to that about. It's like I have Sonia and I have others where I can sit there and vent and be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this pissed me the fuck off. And like, and at the same time, having a lot of empathy for, like, I could get mad about something and understand it. It's like not an either or. It's like I could get mad about this and I could understand that, like, oh, you only know what you know. Like you haven't been taught anything else, because I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been down that road and only knew what I knew before, and then having compassion for that. Okay, understanding, like, I'll get angry at first and then I'll back up and I'll do some self-reflection of like, that's my piece, is like, oh, why is this coming up for me? Like when somebody asks me, you know, where are you from? I'm like, oh shit, I get defensive really quick. Why? Because those are fighting words.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of historical trauma and all this stuff comes up for me, and I know it does. And I get upset. And it's not because of you triggered something, but this is because of my past that it's really getting me pissed off, and the things that I've been through and that I know, that's what's pissing me off. And the fact that you don't even know what your words are doing, like, really tells me like, oh, have you like now I'm curious, have you been educated in this? Have you done any work or not? And so really being reflective in that space and knowing myself, like another thing that comes up for me a lot is my mother is she did a lot of trauma to us. She committed a lot of harm on us children. And I always think of why. Why? Like she was a mother, and it was because of all the unhealed trauma that was in her, for generations, and she never had a chance to do any healing. And so I carry her around in my medicine bag everywhere I go, and I do any work of healing just to bring her, because I'm like, you didn't get a chance to do this. And I know you committed all these harms on us, but I'm like, I have compassion for that now. It's like, and looking at others like, oh, you're walking through life like this, blind and not knowing. And so I'm like, oh, let's talk about it. Let's figure this out. And we could do this together, or I could cancel you out. And I'm not into canceling people out. So it's like, there's these two things, but I'm also going to keep myself safe.
Yeah. What's the balance of canceling someone and setting a boundary?
Is like, I'm not going to go and put myself and fall on the sword for somebody. But I will put myself in a space where I'm comfortable, and I'm like, and my cup isn't full. I'm like, my cup is maybe half empty with my capacity to go and talk to people, and to make it into a safe space before I go there. Because I know if I'm not in that space, then I'm going to be reactive, and I know things are going to trigger me. And so I need to have my cup half empty when I'm going into these conversations. And like you said, it's like before you were talking about, how do we do this work with others? And it's like really having that compassion, know that everybody is committing harm as we walk through this world, whether we know it or not. And like, there's no victim, there's no survivor. We're all both on the spectrums, depending on what's going on.
Right.
And so like, I know I've been harmed. I know I've done harm. And like, nobody in this world is like exempt from that. And this happened, and this has been happening way before colonialism. Like the natives here weren't just like, we're all loving each other and everything's great. No, we were at war with each other. We were enslaving each other's people. So it wasn't like everything was roses and rainbows then. So it's like, we've been doing harm as people ever since we've been on this planet. And so like, we're not getting away from that. But like, for me, what I do is like what you were talking about earlier, is I'm walking through this life in a male body and know that impacts others based on their history. And so I'm like, oh shit. Like when I walk into a room, like people are like, oh shit, who is this man? What is he doing? Why? And that's because of what has happened to them. And I know it's no fault of mine. I didn't ask to be born in this body, but like knowing the impact. And so like, how do I walk into the room, and what do I say, and how do I treat others is the only thing I could do, and being knowledgeable in that. And I say that because like it comes up along a lot of times of, my partner has a lot of history of dealing with men in her life, and I have not had the privilege of being a man in the society with privilege. I was in prison for 30 years with men who didn't have privilege. And so coming out here, I was like, oh shit, all of a sudden I have privilege because of this male body. And reckoning with that, like, oh shit, like, and people are telling me I do, and I'm impacting them like this. And I'm like, oh shit, I need to learn how to be out here. And so, and learning how to deal with this privilege that I have. And so really just like understanding that and walking through life, and not walking, but stumbling through life and impacting people with that.
Yeah. Are there any specific, well, I was going to ask for a specific example of like the ways that you set up spaces for yourself where you are going into conversations with people who are going to cause harm to you as you're setting up those spaces. But I also want to ask, like, are there specific examples of like the way that you've navigated like your maleness and like causing harm. Or there's an episode of this podcast with Stas and Lee from Spring Up, when they talked about like the differences between like hurt, harm, abuse, and all those things. And sometimes like when we're bumping up against somebody's wound unintentionally, right, the responsibility is like partially on us, but like just because I bumped your shoulder doesn't mean like I knew you had a scab there or a bruise there and was like pounding away at it, right? Like, so there's a difference between like the hurt and harm. And if you want to like get that breakdown, go listen to the Stas and Lee episode. But is there? I'll ask about like that part. Like, is there a specific instance that comes to mind where like I have caused harm or hurt in this situation in my male body, where whether it was intentional or unintentional, like how did you navigate that repair process?
So this happens all the time with me and my partner. Is I may, let me just think of one of just an instance that happened like this morning.
Mm-hmm.
I was up early and then she came downstairs and I'm sitting there and I'm like, "Oh, good morning. How are you doing?" And she started cleaning and started like getting ready for something. And I was like, "Oh, I was like, damn, how come she isn't cheery? Like, how come she isn't glad to see me this morning, or like happy of what I perceived as happy?"
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I'm like, what I want is this loving person, this accepting person, this person to be joy because they're seeing me in the morning and they're like, "Hey, what's up?"
Mm-hmm.
What I know for her, what happens for her is like, "Oh, you want me to fall in this woman role that society has placed down, that we're supposed to be this way, supposed to be cheery, supposed to be, adapt towards this man." And so like knowing that happened, I was like, "Oh shit. Okay." So I was like, we sat down. I'm like, "Come here. Can I talk to you real quick? I know what's happening here. And I'm sorry, that like, this is how I wanted you to be. And this is how life is supposed to, and this is how society has told you you're supposed to be because you're a woman."
Yeah.
Like, and knowing my male body triggers that in her, so it's like, oh, and so we talked about it this morning. And she's like, "Yeah, I know exactly where it's coming from. I do as a person know where it's coming from." And then knowing her and her harms that have happened to her. And at the same time, understanding that like, I still want that loving and I still want that relationship and that familiarity, but knowing that my body brings along this piece of patriarchy that she feels.
Yeah.
Because I want certain things. Like I want a hug. I want to be close. And like, and it's not about me as a person. It's about me as being a man and a symbolization of patriarchy and wanting a woman to do that. And so we sat down and we talked about it. And, I was like, "I'm sorry, I realize this is happening. I do." And, and so we sat down and we just talked this morning. And by the end of the talk, we're like, "Yeah, we know where it comes from." So we dug deeper into it and understand where the roots of these problems are coming from. And it didn't have to do with today, like what was happening with me today, or, how I am today. This is all historical shit, but it still plays out. And we have to realize like we're doing these things unintentional. So I did that. And then we sat on the couch and we talked about it for like 15 minutes and then we were good. Like, it was that easy.
Well, and like, it's not that like patriarchy is fixed,
No.
right? And things will continue to happen. But I think like, to your reframe of like this work as just like healing, right? Healing is ongoing, restoration is ongoing. And in the course of your relationship with your partner, right? Like there are things that are going to continue to happen. And like, I'm not saying you're the only person who causes hurt and harm in your relationship. I'm sure there are things that she does as well that like cause harm to you, but like the commitment to the relationship is what keeps you all continuing to do that. The ability to have spent the time to like learn all these things about yourselves is also what's contributing to that. And I'm thinking a lot about, what you said about your mom, where she didn't necessarily have the time and resources and space to do that. I think, I don't know like the specifics of your mom's life, right? I think about a lot of people who either haven't made the time or haven't been afforded the time to do that. And it's hard to say to someone like, you know, it's time to heal. This is exactly how you do it, because like there's no way to prescribe um, this work to anyone. And I think like that dovetails into the question that I was going to ask before about, you know, you go into these situations often where you are either facilitating, you are educating, you are asking for money from, you are people who like are unaware of um, either their own trauma, their own need for healing, the historical trauma that sits in the conditions under, you know, this the maybe it's the foundation, maybe it is this institution, maybe it's, you know, whatever the circumstances. How do you, you know, like what is a specific way that you have like set those boundaries, that space for yourself to go in and be able to hold what they put onto you or into this space in a good way or in a way that you can manage?
So I have a thought process, and I have a like so I have a process still that I work from when I was inside. Is I put on my headphones and I go work out, and that's like my meditation. That's how I get back in my body and how I reset myself and get in. And so that's the one way I physically get back into myself. And then like when I go into these spaces, we're setting up, whether that's we start to build relationship with whoever we're doing this with.
Yeah.
It's like we're okay, let's talk over the phone first. Let's get into like checking in with each other. Like, and if it's somebody I don't know, then I'm going in with other people that I do know. And so we have actually set up something right now. We're setting up a container, what we like to call a safe container of trust and like of trust. And so we're getting the neighbors together that we've talked to, that have some set of values that are similar or that have some openness. And so really setting the boundary there of like, we're going to build community first. In those instances where people don't know that are the broader community, like we're going to build a foundation first. We're going to build a community. We're going to build relationship. And to where I go into things that are unknown, like I can't really prepare for those. I don't like, oh, let me sit down and figure out how I'm going to teach this person this. It's like just going into the conversation very curious. And usually with the co-facilitator, somebody else that I can go in with, because knowing that I'm going to be triggered or they're going to be triggered by something that happens here. Like we know we're going to be triggered by something, especially if it's going into a group or talking to somebody who has done no work at all with themselves. Is like, oh, this is going to be very, very different. And so I think we go into it, we talk about it first, like, okay, this person, you know, are these people who have contacted us about this? Let's get ready and we'll talk about it beforehand, but then we'll go into it with our, like, let's check in. Let's just see how people are doing. And it's sometimes I've been in rooms where it's all cops and like we're going in and these are all correction officers or cops. And they're like, why the hell is there an altar here? And I need a table in front of me. And so like, just understanding that like people are different. And then my understanding, I think, helps me a lot of like, you've been taught this way. You haven't been exposed to anything else. So I think my understanding of all that actually helps me sit in the room longer and my boundaries are more further out there. And so, but I do have boundaries of like, you know, you're not going to say some racist shit. You're not going to like, if you do, we're going to talk about that right now. We're not going to brush it under the rug and be like, okay, it's all great and gravy. We just want to be rainbows and unicorns here. No, we're going to talk about what you just said because this impacted people. And I've been in groups where somebody will say, I remember somebody said a term that was harmful towards anybody that was LGBTQ. And I was like, okay, let's stop the group right here and now. Because there are people in here that identify like that. How did that hit you? How did that land on you? So that way, the person who just said it, like we're gonna sit here and we're gonna work through this together, because this just had an impact on somebody sitting right here, and we're not gonna act like it didn't happen. So just really like working through that together and building the muscle, like we're going to have a tough conversation.
Yeah.
So, and not to shame them, but to like understand, like you may not have known what you said or understood like how much that impacts somebody, but somebody here is going to let you know now. So now you know. You can't say you don't know now. And so now you know.
Right. And I think like head knowledge is one thing, right? When you're talking about like breaking habits that like you've been socialized to, I have, to your point, like, grace and understanding of, where people come from, whether it is use of homophobic, transphobic language, racial slurs, but like even more often, like in their behaviors that they're exhibiting that are dismissive of people as humans, right? Who are equal to themselves. That does take unlearning, just like somebody who is like born into poverty and trauma, like has these socializations of like survival, and I'm going to do this thing to survive, right? I'm going to hurt you before you hurt me. I'm going to get you before you get me. Like those are behaviors that like need to be unlearned. And like there's a thing that you can say like, oh, like, hey, if you do this, do you understand the impact that has on other people? Right? Like that might land intellectually, but the next time that you're in that situation where you are uncomfortable or feel in danger, like that behavior may or may not be the thing that is the healed result of like doing that internal work. And so like I was listening to Father Greg Boyle on a podcast the other day, the Homeboy Industries priest who, for those of you who don't know, Google Greg Boyle, but talking about, the homies as he calls them, right? Everybody has their time when they are going to make that change, right? Like you can't just like tell a person like, this is what's wrong with you, change.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe I'm giving men, white people, cis people, het people too much grace, but like it's a similar thing where it's like you can highlight the problems, but like what is the inflection point where people will want to change for themselves, want to heal for themselves? Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm going to heal this part of me, I'm going to change this, I'm going to restore this for the sake of a relationship that I have. But if you're not in proximal relationship to somebody, like what is the incentive that people have? And like I intellectually understand that. It's just hard when behaviors don't change. I'm thinking very specifically about yesterday when I was facilitating a learning for a group of teachers, and there were some white teachers who came up to me after and shared with me like, thank you for the way that you presented this. Like it hit me in a way that like didn't make me feel guilty. And I was like, let me think about that. On some level, I want you to feel guilty, right? Like,
yes.
Like if you didn't understand, if you didn't take away from what I shared about like the way that white supremacy is upheld in classrooms, like, and like you didn't see how you're contributing to that and feel some kind of way, like, I don't know if I did my job. Well, and like, then I have to internalize, like, it wasn't on me. That's like their experience that they're having. But like, that probably wasn't the inflection point for them to like change behavior. And like, I've got to be okay with that. But yeah, that's just like another level of the work that I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate.
No, that's beautiful. I love that piece of like, I too want people to be uncomfortable. Actually, people to feel guilty is like, you need to feel that, because that's your internal system telling you, oh shit, I did something wrong. Like the difference between shame and guilt, shame is all about like,
I am wrong, right? I am bad, but like,
I am bad, but like guilt is like, I did something bad. I need you to feel some guilt because you're walking through this world. And like, just like I walk through this world as a male, you walk through this world as white. And like, how does that impact people? And if you can't feel some guilt about that and know that, then when are you going to change? Like, you're not going to change because you're around a bunch of people that all feel the same way. And so there's never any guilt. It's like, let's just cheer us on until we take over this fucking world and cheer each other on. And there's never going to be a reflection point. I think for me, it's like until you build relationship with others to where you feel that guilt and like, oh, now I need to change this behavior because I care about something. If I don't care about anything, then why change? Like, I think there's for me, there's a piece in there. It's like, if I don't care about others, why should I change anything I'm doing that impacts them?
Well, I mean, and I think with that situation specifically, it's thinking about like, as in a predominantly white institution, the people of color, the people of the global majority, right? They often don't say the thing that like makes them uncomfortable, like for survival, right? Because like I'm not gonna share every time like you microaggress me, call me the wrong name, make some comment that you didn't think was offensive, because like it's not worth it for me in this moment to like be constantly correcting you. But what that tells the person who's white is like, oh, everything that I'm doing in the context of this relationship is okay, when it's not. And you know, maybe that's another piece that like there needs to be like some truth telling in that situation, rather than saying like, hey, this is the way that like whiteness tends to show up in organizations. Like, no, let's talk about concrete examples of like where this shows up in your school, and just reflecting like, maybe I didn't do a good job or like a good enough job of doing that or inviting them into that yesterday. But like, you just wish people had this awareness, but they don't. And so like, you know, like when you walk into a room full of correctional officers or police officers, right? I would say most of them did not go into the field saying like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to wreak havoc on Black and brown communities, right? Yeah. Like it's, but like that's the impact. And like, now what, right? I imagine most of the times you go into those rooms, like you don't have people like turning in their badges and guns, but like, yeah.
It's funny. It's like, but and at the same time, like, do you understand where policing started? Do you understand where it came from? Like how, like, and now you're an officer, because I do a lot of trauma trainings with officers and community, and it's like there's a lot of Black and brown officers, and they're like, how could I be racist? I'm Black and brown. I'm like, oh, you're a cop. But like, so
yeah,
so it's like you don't understand. It just tells me that they don't understand. Like, you may be great as a person, but the institution and the system that you're representing is based on racism. And this, you put on that uniform and it's racist, period. Like, you can't get away from that.
Yeah.
And so like, I think going into that is like knowing that the conditions were set up for these people to be in that position of survival, even when they're a cop. Like, I need this cop so I could get a paycheck, feed my family, have a home. Like, these conditions are all set up for you too. Like, and you're going to hurt your people and not even realize it, so you can survive also. So it's like, oh yeah, like you, like there are conditions that are playing themselves out over and over again in all these different things. And I remember when I was inside, there was this correctional officer. She was like awesome. Like, she had a supervisor position. And when none of her superiors were around, or people that were working in corrections, she was very personal, very like, how are you doing? What's going on? As soon as another cop walked in the room, flipped. I'm like, oh, this is very interesting. But watching that behavior is like, she knew how to treat people, but she didn't know that, like, as soon as a cop walked in and somebody that could get her in trouble, she went into survival mode like that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to risk this. Yeah. I'm not going to risk my livelihood to treat this person as a human. But she didn't realize all the conditions that were behind it. Like, she just automatically did it. And I'm like, oh shit, like this is something that I'm aware of, but maybe you're not.
Yeah. What we haven't like really explicitly talked about the work of the Ahimsa Collective. And I'm curious, like, as we're talking about like this work of healing broadly, restoration broadly, there are all these different ways that people need to heal, both like from trauma that they've experienced in their personal lives and like the historical, institutional, systemic trauma that we're all navigating. I'm going to ask this two ways. Like, what do you see as your role, like as Richard, in helping people heal, right? Like, you're not the healer, right? But you are like building spaces for people to heal. And then what is the role of the Ahimsa Collective?
So my role it changes all the time. My outfacing role in the organization is co-executive director.
Mm-hmm.
And my role inside the organization is with people that come on staff, and we run it very differently. Like, we have our back structure, our foundational structure to be a nonprofit, but then how our staff is structured is very circular. And so we consider ourselves like the core staff, and then the core fam. And the core staff is made up of about 8 people. And then the core family is made up of a group of about 20 that has been with us from the start. And then beyond that, we have a group of about 40 that are facilitators. But we do everything in circle, whether it's considered a staff meeting or just checking in or going out and celebrating. Like, we do everything. Our practice is circle. And so my role in that is, sometimes I'm a facilitator, like in the organization. Like, I'll call a meeting for something, or I'll call a circle for something, or sometimes I'm just the participant when somebody else needs to call a circle. And so my role in there changes from there to there. As far as the foundation stuff goes, it's like my role is to keep this organization so we can keep doing what we're doing. And that means keeping in line with the IRS, keeping in line with our taxes, with our accountants, with all these things, so that we're not shut down.
Yeah.
And so that may be guiding people through receipts, or guiding them into how to direct a program or manage a program, or how to go in a prison, or how to facilitate a group. And so and then also listening and learning from other people that are doing different work. And so what we do is, like, we really have an advice type of structure. Is like, if you're more experienced, like I'm more experienced in reentry and incarceration. So anything that comes up around that, like, I'll usually make the decisions on those, me and a couple other people on our core staff that have been formerly incarcerated. There's a lot of them. So we'll get together and we'll be like, oh, well, we have to make the decision on this, but we'll get the whole circle and, like, get advice from everybody. And so it's like, if I'm going to hire somebody, I'm like, okay, it's my decision to hire, but I'm going to get advice from all the staff, because I don't want to make a decision that's going to impact the staff in a very negative way.
Right.
So I'm going to just get information, but they don't help me it's not like a democracy where we take a vote and then that's a decision. No, it's the advice making. So I'm like, oh, I want to hire this person. Then I got one staff saying, oh yeah, I love this person. And somebody else saying, well, me and this person has had a conflict for 20 years, or this person is, I'm not in a relationship with this person. So me bringing this person is it going to create more harm? Mm-hmm. Or do we need to work something out between these two? Are they willing to work it out between themselves? And then I have to make the decision, where do I want to go from there? Yeah. And so that's how my role in the organization is. And then as far as Ahimsa goes, we do a lot of different things. And so for me, my passion is the reentry work. Mm-hmm. And so and having come through it myself is where I was informed a lot through my experience of reentry. I was in a home where I had to go to this house. There was 32 of us in this house with 1 bathroom, 5 bedrooms. And there are 32 men in this house, and we're all like trying to get up early enough to beat everybody else to the bathroom so we could use the bathroom and get the hell out of here and be back by curfew. Yeah. And it was just a very bad, shitty situation, what I considered shitty. And so
32 literally. Guys, one bathroom. Yes, absolutely.
And then the staff had a bathroom, but we couldn't use theirs. Like, it was like, this is like, why is this set up like this? And so, and then having to run back to the house at 9:30 at night and having all these conditions on me that didn't apply to me. And so what I mean by that is, like, I had to go to groups in order to get my housing, in order to not be violated and go back to prison, mm-hmm. even though I didn't need these groups. Yeah. Like, they were teaching me how to do a resume, how to apply for a job. I had a job if you just let me go to it. And then, like, I had to go through drug and alcohol counseling. I'm a drug and alcohol counselor. I haven't used in over 25 years. And like and if I didn't do any of these things, I lose my housing, then my parole's violated and I go back.
Right.
And so like I had to go through these things. And then, so going through that, I was like, my heart was in reentry, and I'm like, we need to do it different. We need to do this differently to where it's more person-centered, more healing. And so people coming out of prison are felt held, and like all your needs are met, all your basic needs are met. So I always refer back to Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy needs.
Mm-hmm.
And if those bottom needs are met, then you could be creative. You could figure out who you are. And coming out of incarceration, this mass incarceration, bringing people into this and holding them with housing, food, transportation, and not putting any pressure like you need to have your life together in 6 months, I feel is really like a way of healing some shit that's there, whether you were raised, you know, and a product of redlining, a product of displacement, of like relocation through the Native Americans, like however you were put into these circumstances is now, here is some housing, here is being held in this way that you feel safe and secure, and you don't have to worry about it. You don't have 6 months to get your life together after doing maybe 5, 10, 20 years in prison. And you could sit here and maybe not work the first 2 or 3 months or 6 months. Like figure out what you want to do. How do you want to be in this world?
Yeah.
Because it's all changed, and you're coming out here out of some trauma, being held in this way. Our staff's here. The whole house is formerly incarcerated people. Everybody has their own bedroom. Nobody is double celled. Nobody has a bunkie. Like we're not recreating the carceral system at all. So that way there's not that residual trauma coming over into housing here now. It's like, oh, I'm in a home. And I purposely made this house as like, shit, I want to live in this house. Like, like, I want to live there. I don't want to put somebody in something that says you're unvaluable. Like you're not valuable enough to live in a home that is nice. Like we'll put you in the basement or another room, or you're going to sell up with somebody because that's all you're worth. No, you're worth so much more. Yeah. And so putting that and like having that healing feeling and hoping that transforms into some creativeness and like, what can I be in this world now? And I get to figure it out. And so that's what we come into the healing of reentry. And we're just now opening up our second home. It's like 5 minutes away from this one. And so, and we did it in a way that there is no like CDCR or DOC doesn't have any saying over us. We're a supportive living home, and we're not a treatment home. We're not a transition home. We're supportive living. And that means that the people in the house get to decide who comes in next. It's not me. It's not the reentry director. It's the people in the house. And we do that in circle. And so we've infused this practice into the home, and like dealing with conflicts into the house in a quote restorative way or a healing way is like, they're like, and there's men and women in there together. And people are saying, oh, you're crazy. What are you doing? This is going to go all bad. They're going to have so many issues. I said, well, they're going to have issues whether it's all men or all women.
Yeah. We're
going to have problems. We're human. And so like let's not create this pseudo environment where it's all women or all men, which mimics the carceral system, and like thinking that there's not going to be problems. So, you know, and you're going to move out. When you move out, you're going to have roommates, or you're going to have a partner. And guess what? You and your partner are not going to get along all the time either. And, you know, you and your roommates are not, and learning how to solve problems and how to be with each other in relationship. So that's one of the things we do is the reentry work. And then we have our healing center in Santa Cruz, which I was talking about earlier, mm-hmm. is we got a piece of land, 25 acres in the Santa Cruz Hills. And this was Sonia's dream, is she wanted a piece of land to where people of color could come back, and people that don't have access could come back to nature, do some healing in the way that they wanted to do healing. And so like we offer it up to social justice organizations, people in our community that are just like, they want to take their family up there because they've never been to the woods. They've never been to the redwoods, never seen that. And to have a place to go that's free, and that they can go up there and you just bring your food, and like, there's a place for you. Yeah. You can come up here and figure out how you want to do this yourself. And if you want our help, we're there to help you. If you don't, and you got it on your own, then it's your space. And there's a caretaker up there who explains, like the safety of like the forest and fires and everything. And it's just, we've seen some miraculous healings. I took my family up there, my sister and my brother-in-law, and I was sitting out on the deck, and I was looking, my brother-in-law was sitting out there, and he didn't think anybody was watching him, but he had this branch, and he was just looking at this branch, like in the forest. Like, and when I talked to him later, he's like, Rich, this is the furthest I've been away from my home ever. And he lives in Sacramento, and it's just Santa Cruz, which is a 2.5 hour drive.
Yeah.
And so for people that have never been out of the neighborhoods, have never, like, to have access to this and come to a healing space that, is a different way. And getting away from, like, my nephew and niece were like, I haven't been out of the city, and just felt like I don't hear sirens. I don't hear like all the cars, and like, I'm not worried about all the stuff that happens over there, the crime and the, so that's what this space was set up for. And we have organizations that come, and, we don't charge, and people, but like big organizations, nonprofits they donate money. But other than that, it's like, it's free for people of color to come back and do their thing. We have a lot of organizations and a lot of people that come up. And then we also, we do some mutual aid work in Alameda County with one of the reentry home that's next door here. There's this church across the street, and we, the people in the house, actually coordinate with them to deliver food to people in Alameda County that don't have access to vehicles. Mm-hmm. And so they'll go get the food in the cars and have drivers come pick up a box for themselves and go drop a box off. And so developing mutual aid like that. And then we also do what's called victim offender dialogues with the inside the CDC correctional system. Is if somebody reaches out, if a survivor reaches out, and this is because it's the only way that it's legal in California, the survivor has to reach out first to CDCR, and then they contact us, and we'll meet with the survivor of the crime and the person who did the harm, and we'll get them, like, we'll work with them as a facilitator to figure out what they need in this situation.
Yeah.
And based on our best practices, like, okay, when and how can we get them together to talk about it? Or do they need to get together? Or do they want to? And that process may take 2 months or may take 2 years.
Right.
They're with them and go through it, and like go back and forth and meet with them personally. And so we do a number of those odds. And then we do, we have RJ in the community, which is instead of calling the police, like, and if you have a situation where somebody was harmed, whether it's personal, interpersonal, or on a systemic level with an organization, and you want us to facilitate that process, we have people that will do that and step in and, hey, okay, so and it's basically the same thing as a vibe, but it's just out here and outside of the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And so that, and then we have Life Comes From It, which is, which was really a unique thing. It's like, it's funding. And so, and it's kind of weird because I feel like, oh, do we call it funding and philanthropy? But that's what it is. Mm-hmm. And so, but
I've heard you say, or I've heard someone say, like, a giving circle.
Yeah, it's more like a giving here's some, like, we want you to keep doing the work you're doing on the grassroots level, but not have all the red tape that the traditional funding has been, like philanthropy has been. Like, we need all these reports and we need to see results. And like, no, it's like, what are you doing? And like building it through relationship and like through context. And it's changed throughout the years of, like, at first we were like, oh, we need to do applications because we didn't know what the hell we were doing. And so then, but now it's based on more of relationship and like, oh, let's figure this out. Like, these people are doing these things. And as we fund more, and it's all we're looking for people doing transformative justice, however they define that, RJ, how that's defined, and land-based projects and indigenous peacemaking. And so it's all different, and like, but people, call it what they want to call it. Like, and so just having people that are on our advisory committee that determine like who gets this, and all of those are people that are doing the work.
Right.
Are actually doing it, and that are have leadership positions out there in the work, and they decide. It's not me, it's not Sonia, it's those that decide. And then we're in the background managing it, like making sure that it keeps running and doing all the background work. And so, and it's really taken off, and it's done a different way. And I love it because it's more community based and grassroots based. And like, there's one example that I give of, like, there was this one lady, she was like, yeah, she was doing work in Washington, D.C. And she's like, I've been doing this work for this long and that long. And, I need a grant. And, we're like, yeah, the work you're doing is great. What do you need the grant for? She's like, so I could get some medical benefits. And we're like, hell yeah, here.
Yeah.
Like, you're doing all this work for the people and nobody's taking care of you.
Yeah.
Here, go get some medical benefits. You've never been able to have any. Like, shit. And so I think just that piece of it, of recognizing what people are doing and not trying to change what they're doing, but on a more grassroots level, to where it's more relationship based instead of distrust based. And yeah.
I'm laughing at, like, we spent like so much time in conversation about like the way that we do the work, that like we just like piled all the things that like y'all do into like the last like 5-10 minutes. If people want to tap into some more of that work, we're going to have links in the show notes for folks to continue to learn more about what they can do, how they can support. As we've heard, so much about doing this work is the practice, but it's always great to have some fundamentals. So if you want to tap into the Intro to RJ Racial and Restorative Justice course, the link to engage in that learning is in the show notes. If you want to go deeper in your practice or explore other aspects of doing work that is restorative and building a better world for future generations, we have learning opportunities for you too, both in courses and live workshops. If you're in a community, school, or organization that would benefit from this learning, we're more than happy to get on a call with you to talk about how we can support this work in your context. In addition to rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast, amplification of this work also means sharing these learning opportunities with others. So if there are individuals in your life who you want to really know this work in a deep and meaningful way, and you've found the things that you've heard here on this podcast really relevant, please send them our way. It's how we literally amplify the work. Now back to the questions that everybody answers when they come on these airwaves. We've already talked about the way that you conceptualize restorative justice in a roundabout way. Can you give a 1 to 2 sentence definition in your own words, like in the most succinct way that you can,
of what restorative justice is?
Yeah.
Oh shit. Restorative justice is a term that we're using to figure out how to heal. And I think it's like it's something that everybody could understand, but that has a lot of things that could fold into it to do healing work around this country. And it can combine, it's bringing a lot of things together. So I think it's becoming more of a value than it is of a thing. It's like a value of healing and a value of way we all do something that brings healing to whichever community that we're in. So I think that's what restorative justice is.
Yeah. As you've been doing this work of healing and restorative justice, what's been an oh shit moment, and what did you learn from it?
There's so many of them. So there was an oh shit moment where I was facilitating a process with this person who committed a murder, and he was in the middle of telling his story, and somebody kept raising their hand on the other side, like kept raising their hand. And I was like, why the hell are you raising your hand? Like, this person is sharing right now, like, should be listening. And everything's going off in my mind. I'm having all these judgments. Like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? Stop. And finally I was like, okay. And I had to ask the person, can you stop for a minute? Yeah, hold on. Cause somebody actually needs to say something. I was like, what do you need to say? He's like, I don't know if this person wants to continue because I was the first responder at his crime scene. And I was like, oh shit. and so me as a facilitator in this process, I was like, damn, what do I do? Like, I don't know how anybody feels about this. And so I stopped the group immediately, like, okay, let's take a break. And then I met with both of them personally. And like, so how do you want to move forward? How do you Do you want to still keep talking? Do you want this person in the room? How do you feel about being in the room? Asking them all these questions. And then we did continue. But what that taught me was like, no matter how much I think I know or I prepare for these processes, things are going to happen, and to trust my gut as they do. Mm-hmm. And so like, I think that's the biggest thing is like I've learned is like, trust your gut. And for me, not to get held up on the agenda or the way it's supposed to go, because things are
interrupting the circle, right? Yeah.
Things are going to be fluid and change as we go through this. Yeah. And like, if I'm not connected and tracking and being fluid, I'm going to be disconnected.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing I've learned the most.
Yeah. And there's no way to say like, when's the time to like pause or like interrupt or put down the talking. Like, it's just something that you have to feel. There's no like diagnosable prescriptive way to do that. And that's just like experience and practice to develop that gut feeling. Thank you for sharing that.
And like that trust in yourself.
Yeah.
Like, we were actually teaching like last week a group, and this lady for the first time, we were like, okay, we'll get in a small circle and you'll facilitate. And she was like, my God, what do I do? And she was so anxious about it. And she read off the first question on a piece of paper. And then when it came around again, she was like, well, do I read another? What do you want to do? And just guided her into trusting her gut. And what she did was spot on. Like, and she made the group, not made the group, but the group felt heard because she reflected back. And then she's like, I don't want to ask a question off the paper. I was like, well, what do you want to ask? I want to ask this question. And she asked it, and the group kept going. And I was like, exactly. This is like trusting yourself and your intuition. And so just really knowing that, like being present.
Yeah. This question is challenging. You get to sit in circle with 4 people, dead or alive. Who are they? And what is the question that you ask the circle?
Dead or alive? 4 people? Mm-hmm. One would be my mother. 4 people, including me or not including me?
Not including you.
Oh, well, good.
You and 4 others.
So it would be me, my mother, her mother, and my brother and my sister. We would sit.
The question you would ask the circle.
We'll just ask them how they were doing. How are you doing? How are you feeling? And yeah, and then from there we would go on. Like that circle for me would never end.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes when people say like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Bob Marley, and Maya Angelou, I turn the question back on them, but we've already asked you how you're doing. And so that's a beautiful response. I love the internalization and making it personal and contextual to you, because that's important. And some of those people are around still where you can have those conversations. Love to see that happen. This one's challenging in a different way because it requires homework from you. Who's one person that I should have on this podcast? And you have to help me get them on.
Oh, that's easy. You should have Sonia Shaw on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should. Yeah.
Beautiful. Can you just
I've already worked it. I told her she should come on this.
Beautiful. I was like, introductory email, or like, do you just holler down the hallway? Or we'll make it happen. And then finally, how can people support you as Richard, the work of Ahimsa Collective, in the way that you want to be supported?
As far as supporting me, be patient with me, like in my responses to emails or my responses to text or phone calls. Like, please be patient. Like, I will get back to you. It's just, I get so busy. So please be patient with me and give me grace there. As far as Ahimsa goes, it's like, I could say the common things of like, donate. No, but it's like realize we're not a perfect organization. Like we're not a perfect collective. And like we bring all of have empathy for us because we bring all of our trauma from other organizations and work into this work. And so be patient with us too as an org, as we're moving forward, and like the things we do and we don't do, we do right and we don't do right, and we're figuring it out also. So yeah.
Beautiful. And like, I would extend that to Amplify RJ and really to all of us, right? As we've shared in this podcast, we're constantly on this journey of learning and unlearning, causing harm, repairing harm, healing. And I think that's a beautiful place to leave this conversation. Thank you so much, Richard, for your words, your wisdom, your stories. To everyone else listening, we'll be back with another episode with somebody living this restorative justice life next week. Until then, take care. Like what you heard? Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast on whatever platform you're using right now. Or if you're old school, tell a friend. It really helps us further amplify this work. You can also support us by following us on our social platforms, signing up for our email list, signing up for a community gathering, workshop, or course. So many options. Links to everything in the show notes, or on our website, amplifyrj.com. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.